Well, thank you very much, Isabel, and that wonderful panel for those very interesting insights. Once again, we commend the report to you. Please send your comments to us. Obviously, we're very anxious to get any kind of feedback that you were able to provide to us. I noticed during that session there was a bit of a flood of questions, so can I suggest if you really want your question addressed by this panel, get it in early. That's the trick here. So when the World Bank Group gets involved in tourism, there's a lot of different things that we do, and we want to make sure that when we get involved in tourism, that the involvement that we do have ends up with our destinations becoming competitive or improving their competitiveness, improving their sustainability, and improving their inclusion. And the question for the next and final panel today is, well, how can these digital platforms contribute specifically to this question of inclusion? And to discuss that, I'd like to call on the moderator for the next session, Anita Mendirata. Now, Anita Mendirata is very well known to people in the tourism industry. She's an author, advisor and communicator, and today she's going to be a moderator. She's very good at that. Anita's worked in tourism for, a long time as well as all of us, but there's one thing about her work in tourism that I've noticed is that it's almost always characterised by her very powerful and infectious connection to humanity. This is something that is very impressive to me, and I'm sure you're going to find the same. And so this next panel on inclusion really couldn't be in better hands. So let me introduce to you Anita Mendirata. Where she is. There she is. Come on in, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and I will say in one sweeping statement, all protocols observed. I am honored to be here. I'm thrilled to be your last moderator. I'm suspecting some of you are thrilled that this is the last panel for moderation. I also bring with me from across the world the greetings from the Secretary General of the UNWTO, Mr. Zurab Pololikashvili, who is currently getting ready for World Tourism Day in Europe. So he sends his best, is delighted that we're having this because, as we know, the global tourism industry is focusing very much on how can we utilize technology to unlock the opportunity for tourism. So John has given a very lovely introduction, which I thank. I am blessed to have a beautiful panel. And we were talking in the back room about recognizing the reality of this session. It is all about inclusivity. So I need you all, please, to stand up. Can everyone please move to the front? So those who are in the front, you're welcome to come on stage. But can I get everyone to move out to the front, please? We also need to make sure that people around the world think the room is packed for the last session. So if we can all move up to the front, that'd be brilliant, because I need you, please, to join me in welcoming to the stage our great panelists. Now, we have a little bit of a twist to it, and I say that literally and figuratively as I say it. You can all sit down once you've got your seats. How many here have a very direct experience with Africa? When I say that, representing 54 countries, so not a glob. Now, what is the truth about the lions and the lionesses in Africa? The lion is the king of the beasts. He's the lord of the lands and all that. But actually, the lions are the lazy ones. It's the lionesses who go and they find the weakest of the buck, and they run it down and exhaust it. And when that poor little buck or poor little zebra or whatever it is ready to just collapse, then the lioness will okay, you can go in and do the kill. And she'll step aside, and she'll let the lion come in and do the kill. That is the classic scenario of a true African woman. And I'm delighted to say we have one of tourism's greatest lionesses with us here on stage, the Honourable Minister of Tourism of the beautiful Ghana, the beautiful Honourable Her Excellency Catherine Efeku, the Minister of Tourism, Arts and Culture of Ghana. And to demonstrate her spirit of inclusivity and her belief that her role is to be a cultural ambassador, she's going to help us all wake up. Madam, over to you. Cue video, please.
I am a Ghanaian.
On your feet. Excellent. Everyone back on your feet, please. We need to get everyone waking up. She's going to teach us some Ghanaian moves. It's going to do audio only, so if you can walk us through it.
Yes, I love my Ghana.
Ni Bahausani. Mia Fancy.
Beautiful Madam.
Mijid Kwan.
The constant shining sun.
Clearly, the country's best cultural ambassador. Brilliant. Thank you very much, madam. We also have joining us on stage with her own unique dance, Sally Davey, the Global Director of Industry Relations for TripAdvisor. Thank you for joining us. We also have with us Marianne Habels, the Global Manager CSR for Booking.com. And we have the lovely Henriette Kolb, the head Gender Secretary at IFC of the World Bank Group. Ladies and gentlemen, one last applause, please, to our group. So, as John said, we're here to talk about inclusivity and the principle of inclusivity. We've had the great blessing of having all day some incredibly valuable conversations about the role of technology in making sure that tourism is indeed inclusive. But one of the challenges that we have of our industry is that we use these words that we become so familiar with, but we can often lose the texture and the heartbeat within them. So, building off of your session, which was brilliant because you started to get into this, and we just thought, well, our job is done. Thank you very much for that. We wanted to just start a conversation of what exactly are we talking about when we speak about inclusivity? What exactly does that mean? And taking it from each another's perspectives, and then we'll look at, okay, what role does technology have to play in increasing that? So, madam, to start with you, when we talk about tourism and its role and responsibility in ensuring inclusivity, how do you see that word? Please.
Thank you. Good afternoon to each and every one of you, and thank you for staying. Quickly, we have to thank the World Bank for putting this together. It's the first, so we thank you. Anita, when you ask of inclusivity on the continent, because I'm here for Ghana, but I'm representing also the 54 countries. So policy-wise, as a woman heading a sector that primarily is populated by women in the value chain, we want to express our explanation or understanding of inclusivity as getting the young, the women, the disabled, or physically challenged in the entire spectrum of the tourism, arts, and culture value chain. For us, inclusivity is not having access to technology, but having access to the human capital. There's a lot of misconception about Africa and internet penetration. I'll give you the stats for Ghana. We have more mobile phones than people. 119% of phones, access to smartphones in a country of 30 million. We have 34.25 phones. So we have more phones than people, which tells you that if you wanted to use the platform of mobile accessibility to launch any kind of internet app to help people progress from poverty to inclusiveness, you have that. And that permeates a lot of African countries, and that statistics needs to be shared. Secondly, a lot of the young people are literate. You have over 60-70% literacy rate across the board. So we want inclusivity in terms of getting companies that we've listened to all day to tap into the potential of the young, the vibrant, the women in the value chain. So the story, the narrative of tourism will be the catalyst for job creation. That is the inclusivity that we yearn for. Yes, there are problems, but the opportunities overshadow the problems. From policy standpoint, we have a lot of perks for women in the business. Women have a leg up if you wanted to start your small business, SME, especially because it's private sector led. We support them with training, a little bit of finance, but not too much. But at least they have a leg up, and especially in rural communities where they do the agro farms as a value chain to support the food that comes to the table at a 5-star, 4-star hotel. These women and young people who are into farming need the training, the skill base, and also the sense of belonging in that value chain. So inclusivity for us is a question back to the audience. How inclusive do you want the population on the continent to be when they have access to 4G, 3G, and it's underutilized? So that is really where I'm coming from. It's a rhetoric. We are there, we're ready, we're available, and we can send the message that tourism can be a catalyst for change through inclusive use of the human capital on the continent.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And Madam, what's so interesting about what you're saying as well is the fact that when you talk about inclusivity, it's not including when we talk about the continent. You're saying, yes, it's one continent, but don't allow inclusivity to absorb 54 countries and assume they're all the same, because that's where we miss that opportunity. I love that you're also talking as well about the value chain and human capital, looking at the ecosystem of tourism inclusively, whether you're traveler-facing or not, because the supply chain is so important. Thank you. So if I shift now to Sally, from your perspective, similarly, when we talk about inclusivity, how do you view that word, that model, that opportunity? Please.
So I think the way that TripAdvisor thinks about inclusion is access to market for all. So one of the things I think that's relatively unique about TripAdvisor as a platform is that it's completely free to list your business, to collect reviews, to respond to reviews, manage your online reputation. And that has been something that's been really critical to the business from day one. The idea, we talked earlier in one of the sessions about sort of disintermediation, and really from day one of TripAdvisor, it was about giving a voice to everybody, to the whole travel community, to consumers, to share with others the real experiences that they have had, but also to businesses to share their story, their passion. So I think inclusivity, from our perspective, has been about making sure that our platform remains free at the initial point of usage, that literally our goal is to list everything and everybody. And again, in some of the earlier sessions, we looked at some of the data around that and how critical the correlation is between businesses everywhere having listings, collecting reviews, and the correlation that that has to then economic success at the destination level. So yes, I think we've had a big focus on free access, digital training and support in destinations. That's something that we try to make sure is, again, available to everybody. We don't put, for example, a gender-specific lens on things, but we do try to make sure that we're not just focused on the already very successful destinations. We try to make sure that we are communicating at a national level with our partners and making sure that as many people are aware of the free tools that we do have available, are engaging with them, understand how to use them, and then we can work out where perhaps there are pockets where people don't have that sort of access, and we can create other interventions in those places. So at a very broad global level, I think that's how we think about inclusion.
Brilliant, thank you. And I love the fact that you started with by saying that it's about access to the market for all. So even just utilizing the word market, it's both supply and demand. It's all, it's everyone. And rather than TripAdvisor is X. I think the essence of what you're offering says a lot about the 360-degree approach. So if we look at it from your perspective, Marianne, as well, you have an interesting story.
Well, and to prevent from repeating what our previous speakers were saying, I think we really agree on how that definition of inclusion is being shared here, because it's about people being able to equally benefit, but also making sure that everybody has access to that marketplace, as Sally is saying. And I think for us that's really important. It's we've seen our home segment growing, and we see a lot of homestays on Booking.com. We have 5 million listings at the moment that are non-hotels, and with that, we for our customers, but also for our partners, we try to take away the friction out of travel. So that on the partner side means that you have to develop tools that are really easy to use, really simple, but also that you have to provide local support, making sure you're connected to local payment systems, but also we have a customer support, not only for our customers, but also for our partners in 43 languages. And that takes away the barrier between not only intercontinental travel and being able to accept travelers from all types of countries, but also the opportunity to ask for support in your own language. And I think those things are really important, but I think we also have to acknowledge that technology can only take you so far. you also need, like the minister said, you also need training, you need advice, you need someone to reach out to. And that is why we actively work with social enterprises that do so. So we work, for example, with Community Homestay Network in Nepal that is training women to become hosts in really rural, remote communities. Because these women are caretakers of the family and they could use the extra income that a homestay would generate from them. But it's not a normal day-to-day business for them to start running their own business and going online and finding tools. So you also need these type of enterprises that really support that inclusive tourism and travel.
Brilliant, thank you. I think it's building on this sense of, again, it's a 360-degree approach. Henriette, you bring an interesting angle into this conversation, please. How do you look at inclusivity when you look at the industry?
Sure. Just building on what the minister and what Marianne said, I think when we look at it, we sort of frame the conversation around you need to have access to 6 C's in order to be inclusive and access digital tourism opportunities. C number 1 is confidence. If you are not confident enough in using any of the tools and travel, you won't. Second one is capacity. Third one is capital. Fourth one would be community. Fifth one is connection, and you need contracts. And I think all of these 6 C's play out differently for women in particular, because we have seen, of course, if you look at just throwing out some of the gaps that are still a little bit more pronounced when it comes to gaps between men and women, is you have about 1.7 trillion in MSME financing gap. You have about 50% women being less likely to use the internet at same income levels. You still have a mobile, not Ghana, but not in Ghana, but you do have still quite a lot of gender gaps when it comes to mobile phone access and usage. And I think in particular in South Asia, in Southeast Asia, you still have up to 38% of access gaps. And it's really interesting because if you dig it a little bit deeper and sort of comes back to what I did in 2010 with actually the GSMA, when we first time ever sort of quantified the mobile gender gap, it's interesting because Gates at that time, we said to Gates Foundation, come on, let's kind of work together on the access gap. And they were saying, well, no, that's going to be closed by itself. Here we are 8 years later, and actually the access gap hasn't closed. And so I think looking really at building physical assets and being able to use them is important. And there's really strong obstacles for making, I think, that a reality. One is around, for sure, self-constraint, so lack of perceived need. The second one is certainly lack of trust. There's a lot of lack of access to, obviously, still literacy in terms of being able to utilize technology more full, and so on and so forth. So if we design interventions as the World Bank Group with our private and public sector partners, I think we need to tackle the 6 C's in order to really leapfrog and make sure that women and disabled and youth can really bridge the digital divide by making sure they have access and usage. Now, just one more point I'd like to make, which is you can't design inclusively if you don't know who your users are, right? And so what might be maybe surprising to the audience in this room, and Alexa, I see her there, is here. So just in a little bit of propaganda, we did a study with a company that might not be in the news a ton, around its leadership on gender equality with Uber. But we partnered with Uber because what we found really interesting is that they gave us sex disaggregated company data for 6 emerging markets to better understand who does have opportunity in terms of riders and in terms of drivers. And are sharing economy business models allowing to leapfrog and closing some of those gender divides? And actually, it's been really interesting because I think oftentimes we see companies like Uber, or Lyft, or Didi, or others very monolithic. We say they're either bad or they're good. And what's been really interesting and fascinating, I can recommend you a bit more of reading, is that how nuanced it was specific to the markets. And the point is, if you don't sex disaggregate your user data, you don't really know if you're inclusive or not inclusive because you don't know who you're serving and you don't know who's providing the services at all times. And I come back to giving a little bit more granular examples of that.
And I think, Henriette, what you say is so, so important because we can't be inclusive if we don't know who we're including. And I think that's a really important part of it. And, Madam, we were all speaking about it in the... it's actually difficult because the pre-briefings for the sessions, a lot of the good stuff comes out, but it comes out off stage. It's almost a matter of, stop talking, I need you to save it for the stage. But we were talking about the fact that Stephanie made the comment this morning about the fact that 60% of the continent is without connectivity. But 40% has it, and we can't lose that. And so I think Madam was twitching when she's hearing this. It's like, yeah, what about us? And what about Kenya? And all these other countries that can help, as the Honourable Minister of Jordan was saying, trigger those other ecosystems to grow. So based on that, when we look at this and we look at how do we take all the goodness from today and make it workable in our own environments tomorrow, we look at the opportunity of technology transforming our sector. Where do you each believe the priorities are for starting to apply technology for the transformation? So trick question, I didn't tell any of you this. But it's, what is the priority and how do we measure its impact? Henriette, I want to go backwards and throw it to you.
Okay.
I can see you thought you had three people's time.
All right. So look, I think, and I give you a sneak preview. Won't reveal its name, but to your point, we think obviously designing inclusive technology platforms is really crucial. And it's crucial in three dimensions: goods, services, and capital. And I think we have had a lot of conversation around capital being, or digital financial payment system being designed more inclusively. I think we have had less of a conversation around goods and services. And so watch this space. On the 3rd of October in San Francisco, we're about to unveil a huge new initiative where we get key companies involved in actually helping to drive change. And companies who are by far not perfect, and nor is the World Bank Group. And I think that's one additional thing I think to really be mindful of, is when we look at inclusivity, diversity, and in particular with a view and lens on gender, no one is perfect, and we have to be quite humble in recognizing our own sort of, challenges, and then go and speak to partners and clients about it, and really recognize we can learn from each other on a pre-competitive level. And I think you've been sharing some really great stories as to how you work together, and even though you're competitors, but at the same time you really kind of go on the journey of learning when it comes to overcoming some of these challenges and barriers. And so we're excited to host this peer learning platform. It will be time-bound, 18 months, where we get together to really hone in on this. I think the other priority is that you start holistically. You can't just go straight to the consumer. You have to go leadership, workforce, supply chain, community, and consumer when you engage private sector companies. And so I think the bank group, having taken the first step, and I think we chatted as well about it, that might be something you could explore. We did something that's called the Economic Dividend for Gender Equality. Has anyone heard of this? We got EDGE Gender Certified. My World Bank Group colleagues. Whoa, that's okay. Okay, never too late to learn about it. But what it is, it's quite helpful because it's a methodology that companies use around the world to really set an international benchmark on their diversity inclusion efforts with a particular gender lens. And it quantifies and triangulates employee survey data with HR data, with policies and cultures of the company. And it shows you where you can close key gaps and what your business benefits are. Because we all agree, I think, on stage, and hopefully the audience, that closing gaps is good business, right? And we have enough data. The IMF has just come out actually this week with an amazing brief around the convincing stats that still some people might need in terms of closing access to finance gaps between men and women. So we have the data, but we need to start at home and make sure that we're designing inclusively our workforce approach, and then going into having conversations as a gender-smart investors with our clients and partners.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Sally, priority and how do we measure it?
So there were two thoughts that came to my mind as you asked the question and as you were talking, Henrietta, which is, so the first one is about this thing of if you don't know where you're starting from, how do you move the needle? And it was a discussion that Marianne and I had both had with also the rest of the panel, because we don't actually collect that level of personal data on TripAdvisor. We collect broad trend data, which helps us understand some of the stuff that Charlie was talking about earlier at the kind of global level, some of the economic impact of the work that we do. But in terms of individual users, we do offer users a chance to tell us, for example, if they're a woman or man owner of a business, but we certainly don't make that mandatory. And so when we started working with the World Bank and partners at the IFC to start looking at ways that TripAdvisor can share data for the to support bank work, this was a kind of not a sticking point, but an area we uncovered together of thinking, well, it's not data that we collect, so is it something that we should be collecting? And I think that opens some kind of ethical discussions as well. And it seemed that Marianne had been
privacy legislation in Europe doesn't make it easier as well to do that.
So I think it is something that we're very, very keen to get indicators on. But again, how do you kind of deal with those privacy issues? But the kind of second thought that I had around this, around kind of how you how you can leverage technology to facilitate inclusion, and thinking a little bit about financial inclusion, something Henrietta just said sparked this. I was chatting to Miguel earlier, although I don't think he's still here, but he works in the FCI team here at the bank, and he was saying he'd just been out in India and he had met a micro-lending firm called Indify. And they only work across 3 sectors, one of which is hospitality. And when hospitality businesses come to them for microfinance loans and bridge funding, etc., one of the key metrics they use to determine whether they're going to lend or not is the quality score that business has on TripAdvisor, because they have found over their years of lending that it's a very, very valuable metric and a reflection of the strength of the business. So I think these are all really exciting opportunities, and where really we're kind of overlapping private and public sector and development opportunities with data and insights and technology that we have. I'm really excited and keen to explore more of these, because these scenarios are happening every day. It's just sometimes that we don't necessarily know about them, but if we do know about them, we can make that data available, we can support, share, make sure we're triangulating data sources, which is critical. But I think it's all about starting with a shared understanding of what these buzzwords and terms actually mean, agreeing definitions and what benchmarks we're going to create together, and then working out what data we need to collect to then work out whether the interventions we are putting in place are having a meaningful effect. But that's not just down to one organisation. I think that really has to be a cross-sector collaboration.
Indeed, and I think that's a really important point, that the language we use to define the solution is critical, so we know we're all measuring it the same way. Marianne, building on that.
No, I totally agree, and I think that's why I'm happy to be here on stage with Sally, because I think we can learn a lot from each other, and Airbnb in the audience as well. What I also think that we shouldn't forget is the work that we still can do before we even touch that point where we need to put in extra effort. Right? The fact that we're just exploring the opportunity to give people tools to build their own businesses, and that these tools can be smarter and better, but also that the type of support that people need to use them could increase. That's something that we need to commit to and also need to invest more in, because we tend to look at new technologies and blockchain a lot, but what about the old technologies that we haven't been leveraging yet? For example, we work with a partner called Backstreet Academy in Southeast Asia, and they actually developed a feature phone technology. So you don't have to use a smartphone, you don't have to be online, but you get an SMS, and they use that in the rural areas of Cambodia and Laos to connect you to a local guide and to help you get a really true local, off-the-grid, off-the-beaten-path experience. And they're not going to wait until the internet comes. They just use the technology that is already there. And I think we sometimes overlook to so much looking at what's next that we sometimes tend to forget to what we already have.
That's a great point, that the what next can distract us from the what now and the immediacy of that opportunity itself.
And the amount of work that we still need to do to leverage the opportunity from what's already here now.
Indeed. Brilliant. Madam, from a government perspective.
Anita, it looks like what we discussed backstage is coming out here. We did mention, and to reiterate the point, what is available is how do we maximize. For us as a government from Ghana, the priority is the missing gap is in skills development. You have a nation with so much potential, and yet there is a missing gap in using the technology to leverage. How do you go on TripAdvisor? You have thousands of locations and sites that's not listed. Now, how do you maximize the use of a simple smartphone or the local communal culture of advertising and letting people know that this opportunity exists, that you can actually place your business on a platform and people will come? So that, to me, is a priority, the marketing, using the technology to leverage the potential. The second is skills gap. Yes, the technology is available. We're not doing blockchain. We're not doing robotics. What about the simple SMS, the simple, robust mobile money platform that bring financial inclusion for rural communities? So that missing gap is to build the confidence level of SMEs owned by women and young people so they feel empowered using the technology to brand themselves as hospitality gurus, marketers, and brand ambassadors of a destination. So if I were to walk away from here, is to network with the big companies that are here to leverage on the potential using technology, the existing one. And I think it will be measurable.
Brilliant. To that point, and weaving in now some of the questions that we've received, so if anyone else from the audience, please do send up your little cards. I want to actually throw it out to all of you because it's not a government-specific question. I don't want to be greedy and give you all the government questions. And the question is, how can the Department of Tourism in countries ensure they are developing a sustainable tourism sector? Is there a template or best practice model in place that can be replicated in developing countries? Now, I'm going to throw this to all because you all have a very holistic approach. And clearly there are countries that are willing and able and impatient and excited to say, let us use your frameworks to leverage what we already have in place. Who's doing it really well right now that we can learn from? So with your global perspectives, can you see a country, an initiative, a corporation that's actually taking an approach that's saying we can actually just simply connect and make it work more effectively? Henriette, have you seen in your travels?
Oh, you really pick on me. Jesus. Okay. So not coming from the tourism industry, I'll go first. What's been really interesting is I think one of the key understanding of a lot of industry players and governments has been that one concern that's on women's top of minds is stopping them from travel and utilizing services more, which is safety. And so we've seen much more movement between the hotel industry, connectivities on the airlines, as well as in ride-sharing services to come together in a multi-stakeholder partnership. They started it off in the US and they're expanding it now internationally to better understand from a data perspective what stops women from traveling more. And there's been one survey that they've done in the US, which is really quite an interesting and maybe frightening read, in the sense that 71% of travelers in the last year who are female have experienced sexual harassment, the majority of them on business travel, the minority of them on leisurely travel. They also looked into what are women looking most to find in terms of information from providers around booking trips. So where do I have an emergency number? Where am I seeing security personnel at the hotel location? Things like that. So understanding what safety concerns women have, then responding to that and doing that as a broader alliance. Now, I'm not saying anyone is yet doing it well, because I don't think anyone is doing it well. I think that would be a bit pinkwashing, but I do think there is attempts to kind of move the needle in understanding how big of a problem it is and responding accordingly. And just one, I think, area where collectively there's a lot of discussions, female-only cars or female or mixed cars or female-only trains and mixed trains and things like that. So depending on, obviously, the country and the location, I think sometimes having women drivers pick you up from the airport can be more comforting for female travelers, and it gives women an opportunity to penetrate a very male-dominated industry. So skilling up women as drivers could be hugely lucrative for actually resorts and hotel destinations where women in particular choose that location because of safety. So that's a bit of a roundabout way of saying I don't know what I'm talking about, but I thought it would still be interesting to at least show that the US has taken and some others have done some real good job in trying to do more on safety.
And you also demonstrated beautifully that it's not necessarily about best practice, it's about best thinking. Because at the end of the day, safety and security it's a table stake. It's a non-negotiable. And so to your point, we might not have the model working perfectly, but there's a sensitization to the need to ensure that we are communicating those things.
Yeah, and maybe just to add one thing, I mean, just two more statistics that I read. One is flabbergasting, 75% of all flight attendants who are female experience sexual harassment, and 55% of workers, of hotel workers. So really massive, massive issue. And so if the industries cannot get to zero policy, training for their employees, and really building a very different culture, it's going to be hard to get more inclusive in terms of designing products and services that can be of use to all.
Absolutely. Marianne, please.
But I also think, the fact that we were all looked a bit scared when you asked that question also provides an opportunity, because yes, it's about the right models, but also about sharing those best practices. I think, to call her Henrietta's story, and sorry, I'm going to put in another example here, but there's a social enterprise in India we support that's called Saka that's actually doing this. So they're training female drivers to become taxi drivers and then also to pick up female travelers. And this is, again, this inclusivity on both sides. It's not only the host or the companies that are providing the services and giving opportunity in the labor market, but it's also including the female travelers and making sure that they can travel safely. But what they also saw is that in order to train a female driver in India, it takes 12 months. So somebody really needs to put in the extra effort to do it. Because if you just say, okay, if we give women the opportunity and we'll just integrate them into the normal systems, it doesn't work. Because men are the confidence is lacking, the lack of education, there's a language barrier that they need to overcome. So somebody really needs to invest. But once they get the model running, it works. So sharing these best practices and then showing how this would work in other markets is something we should really do. That's something that we invest in a lot in innovation and sustainable travel. Not to do it ourselves, but to look at the models that are out there and how can we support them and accelerate to make sure that there are more sustainable tourism products out there for travelers to use. Because we really need to up the supply and make it more interesting for the consumer to also be attached to, I want to travel sustainably, but how does that work and how does that look and what can I do? And taking a taxi from a female driver is already something that you can do today.
Indeed. And I love what you're saying as well, Marianne, is that one of the beauties of technology is that it shows there are some solutions that no one can or should own, that it's the open sourcing of the solution,
Exactly.
which is where the industry as a whole lifts up the baseline. Yeah. Sally, from your side.
Well, I think it's really interesting, right, this kind of definition of sustainability and sustainable travel. I think we mentioned a minute ago about buzzwords and keywords and definition of terms, and this is a key one, right? So the question was around sustainable tourism, and we've talked a lot about inclusion, but if we're looking at the kind of breadth of sustainability in travel, environmental and social considerations, as well as kind of governance issues, it's a deeply complex and thready area, and there is no one definition, right? So I think it's a case of defining a particular area that we want to focus on, and understanding where the kind of critical needs are. So it's a huge topic, and not one I think that can be very easily or succinctly discussed in a kind of a narrow sense. But the kind of question was about examples, and again, kind of on that theme, it's really hard to kind of think of one example of a destination that's doing sustainable tourism well, because what's the definition you're using? But one that popped into my head that I was talking about just recently is South Africa. So South Africa has made huge strides over the years in terms of their commitment and investment in sustainable tourism, but it's also a very kind of complex destination, a huge destination with actually many, many different markets within it. But a friend of mine was in Kruger National Park, one of the South African national parks, just a few weeks ago, and was there for 5 whole weeks and had an amazing time, and at the end was given a survey as he was leaving. And in this survey, he was asked to kind of talk about his experience from a sustainability angle, and they were really, really deep questions. And as a sustainability nerd that he is, he got really excited about this and contacted SandParks and was like, this is incredible, this is amazing, the fact that you're even gathering this data. And they got back in touch and they said, we're so glad to hear you say this, because we really want to hear feedback directly from consumers about how we're doing, whether our interventions are being effective, whether they're being noticed. And that just kind of blew me away, the fact that, it's a nationally run product, and the fact that they were taking the initiative to survey travellers and get that depth of data, I thought reflects a really fantastic and joined-up strategy at the national level. So, but, then you look at South Africa and Cape Town and some of the issues that have been very much suffered around sort of drought conditions and issues. These are not just issues that are facing South Africa, and certainly the drought that has been hitting South Africa is not the fault of South Africa, right? These are globally joined up environmental issues. So when we think about sustainable tourism, you also can't just think at the national or subnational level. These are kind of global considerations that are affecting everybody. And so it's a deeply complex topic, basically.
But it also, I think, to your point, it's deeply complex. And it's shared in its complexity. Because I think we talk about the Cape Town situation, and why was the world watching when Cape Town was going through its drought? Because there are 120 global cities on the watch list for risks of water being out. So it's that, to your point, it's the fact that everyone needs to be conscious of it, because pandemics are spreading, floods are happening, fires are happening. And I think that to that point, Madam, from your perspective, when you've seen, whether in your home country or somewhere else, where it's starting to shift the needle, it's starting to work, and that the language is starting to penetrate into the actions.
I can think of 2 or 3 locations, best practices that can be shared globally. I'll give you the example, of course, of Ghana. When you do sustainable tourism, you need to get the community involved. Whatever is in that enclave must be owned by the community. And I'll give you an example of Ghana, Elmina Slave Fort. Cape Coast Slave Fort. These are heritage sites that are 500 years old. And for the first time, we as a government deployed a digital platform for revenue mobilization and revenue collection. At the end of the month, whatever is collected from tourists, the entire community, led by their chief, we do a transparent accounting of what was earned, and 5% of that goes into the community. So it also involves the community getting some of the revenue that comes from the heritage site, but it also empowers them to be part owners of the safety and security of the tourists, because they see a direct linkage into a livelihood by the tourists who's visited. And also we use that locals as tour guides, because they've lived there and they've had local oral tradition passed on from generation to generation. 1842 or 1482, the Portuguese first came to that land. They met people. So the oral tradition is that they pass it on to the generation that is there now. So sharing of benefits encourages governance, transparency, accountability, but it also arches up the notch on ownership. Best practice is what is happening also in Rwanda. The gorilla naming ceremony of the baby gorilla, the entire community in that enclave participate, they get revenue sharing, and they feel a very strong sense of anti-poaching behavior, because they know that with their inclusion, they will protect their livelihood. So these are examples that come to mind when the community is actively engaged and they're supported and they see the revenue sharing strategies using technology, they will support the preservation and the sustainability of the product. And to me, that's the best practice.
And interestingly, within that, whether it's in your home country or Rwanda, or recently it happened in Cape Town where Airbnb did their African Travel Summit brilliantly. And interestingly, of all the venues in Cape Town they could have utilized, they went to the community center in Langa, in one of the townships. And what was amazing to see was a number of South Africans who'd never been into the township before, because there's this, we're going into the township. And Honorable Minister Balala from Kenya, the Minister of Tourism and Wildlife, on stage said very clearly, we don't take pride in our townships as Africans. And so to your point, it's when local communities are shown the asset value of what's in their backyard and are becoming the caretakers for it alongside. Because part of the inclusivity is the psychological inclusivity. You said the confidence up front, which was so important. So as time clicks on, and I have a question here, but I think Sally...
No, I'm not the first. I'm just saying it now. No. The minister...
Okay, I'm going to defer the question to Sally. Because there's a question that came up, which I think you'll be able to answer very quickly. Under which conditions are companies such as TripAdvisor willing to share their data on a regular basis with governments?
Oh, brilliant one. We're very willing and keen to do so on a very much frequent and ongoing basis. This is basically the foundation of the relationship that we have been building with the team here at the bank, because we realise that we've been sitting on this mound of data, and actually really, I think, Charlie, it's maybe fair to say, and still until we started working with Adam and the team at Tourism Economics, we didn't realise quite how much data and how valuable it was. And some of this data does have commercial sensitivity, but a lot of it is actually fantastic for us to be able to share. We already do share with client partners we work with, but we do want to be sharing at a more global level, certainly with the bank and indeed other partners to support their phenomenal work. And ultimately this kind of, it's within TripAdvisor's interest and really with a whole industry's interest at heart, because for all of us, right, it makes most long-term sense to be supporting the sustainable development of as many destinations as possible, right? We will be more successful as a global industry the more great and successful destinations there are. And so if we can be sharing data cross-sector and making sure that, and exactly as Marianne said before, sharing best practice as early and as frequently as possible, it's a complete no-brainer. It doesn't always have to have that kind of commercial lens. So the short answer is very keen.
Brilliant.
And I think in general, it's not the willingness, it's sometimes just this how. You know, what data are we collecting? Like the gender data, we're not collecting it, so we cannot share it. So Martina also asked us, does Booking want to participate in this report? I would be happy to, but I don't know what you want to know. So I think just having conversations like this, and for us also seeing what other people in the same tourism sector are doing and drawing inspiration from that. I'm going to talk to Charlie later to see how we can copy exactly what TripAdvisor is already sharing. That is a start.
That's brilliant. And it's interesting, that I think that, and as we're starting to wrap up, you both demonstrated the fact that we're living in a different world. Forget tourism in a different model, where sharing has become part of lifting the baseline for everyone. So ask. And if we don't have an answer, great, maybe we can find that answer together. So to that point, if we pull this all together and we say, we're celebrating World Tourism Day today, tomorrow, choose your time zone, and we're looking at it from the point of view of the role that technology can play in transforming tourism, but tourism as a vehicle for sustainable development in creating jobs, in driving inclusivity, in creating economic opportunity, in protecting environments and cultures. Each of you, quick fire question. I'll ask you last. Quick fire question. What is the fundamental difference technology can play in doing that? What's the fundamental difference? You've got 30 seconds.
I think for us in Ghana, it's deploying the existing tools and also building upon it. And for us, the biggest asset is the human capital. Thanks to the World Bank, they have, for the first time since independence, that's 60 years ago, they have come up with a tourism enterprise development facility for Ghana to refocus its energies on tourism as a sector. And I'm very comfortable that once they come in and whatever protocols they have to go through to approve this, the human capital should be on top of list, where SMEs will be empowered, young people and women will be given that boost in confidence, so they will have the financial inclusiveness to show the world that tourism as a sector can be a catalyst for job creation.
Brilliant. Thank you. Sally.
I think it's about bringing people closer together, ultimately. Travel, as we've heard today, it's a very human, very emotional thing, and we should never forget why people travel, and that's why people do travel. I think technology has the capacity to bring us closer together if done right. And I think that from TripAdvisor's perspective, we are very much about the community of 500 million people on the platform every month, which is fantastic, and we can take lots of great data from that. But how is it that we also bring individuals closer together? That's really our mission. If we can fast-track travellers to connect with the best local businesses for them, and in doing so help support the development of phenomenal, tiny micro-businesses all over the world, then that's when we've done our job, and it's down to us to leverage our technology to do that brilliantly. And I think just a final note in terms of, leading on the social theme, I don't know if people have seen the news, but TripAdvisor is about to basically transform itself in the biggest way it has ever done since the launch of our company to completely deliver on that promise. It's something that's going to be coming out in the next few weeks, and I think this will be a significant impact on our business, on our community, potentially on the industry, and I think it's a real affirmation of our core philosophy of bringing people closer together.
As much as you couldn't tell us the detail, it was quite sweet seeing your excitement of what you know is coming.
Just wish it was live right now.
Marianne, please.
Next to making the connection, of course, which I think is most important, the other thing technology can bring is taking away the friction and lowering the barrier. So making sure that everybody can join and everybody can enter. You don't need to put money up front. Tomorrow you can become an entrepreneur. You can run your own business. And that's what technology can do.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks. So actually, that's the one thing that came out first when we asked women, why do you drive on a sharing platform? Is flexibility. Is you can combine the often household tasks that still disproportionately fall to women, except those men in this room. They are surely equally sharing in all household tasks, but outside in the world, it's pretty much the women predominantly. And so the flexibility that you can go on and off the app whenever you like and build around your productive income time to household unpaid time. That was the biggest benefit for women. So it lowers the entry barrier as well into male-dominated spaces. So I think those two are the highest on the agenda.
Brilliant. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I completely cheated because I was supposed to do a summary, and I thought, no, I'm going to share the responsibility. And it's interesting how if we look at just the conversation around inclusivity, I'm not sure if anyone recognized, but no one talked about the traveler experience from the traveler perspective. It was all from the ecosystem of creating and delivering, which was really quite nice from that side. We got away from the gadgets and the toys. and we talked about why we do tourism in the first place, which goes back to what Sally was saying about it is about creating access for all, which is about then using technology to remove those barriers, whether it's the technology, the psychological barriers, the financial barriers, the skills barriers, the opportunity barriers, the models, whatever they are. How do we use this golden key to open up those doors so that people can get involved? But what was really interesting, I found, was when it comes to inclusivity, how do we ensure inclusivity? Ensure that we understand where the exclusivity is, and then start working with that to use technology. The last thing I ask you all to do as we wrap up, and before I hand over to Hannah, is to please give a huge warm thank you to our finale panel itself. Thank you very much. And a special thank you to Henriette for being my victim this afternoon. Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anita and Minister, Sally, Marianne, and of course, Henriette. Thank you for enabling us to understand both what is and what's next. And just last few minutes with all of you. I now challenge you to really look to the future. We've had an incredible day here, and of course, I'm not referring to the immediate future, which is that thirst-quenching reception upstairs in the lobby level of the Rotunda, but to our collective future in tourism for development. We began today with a plenary session hosted by Stephanie von Friedberg here at the IFC, who really said, what do we think? What will travel look like in 5 years, 10 years? And the responses were quite wide-ranging, as many of you heard, from robots to substantive labor force changes. That session really set the stage for our 3 technical panels. 5 years seems like a long time in terms of looking into the future. However, as we've learned today, and Anita has emphasized again in this last panel, we are in the midst of a great transformation of travel and tourism. In session 1 on user-generated content, we heard the voice of the traveler. I asked all of you to both hear that voice and learn from it. Damien, Charlie, and Adam provided us with key trends, strong data, and examples of real applications to destinations such as Indonesia and Puerto Rico. And all of us here, I think, are both excited as well as have a responsibility to move forward with the opportunities to apply these findings to other destinations and learn from them, whether it's on an ongoing developmental basis with destinations or helping after a crisis has hit. In session 2, Louise shared her childhood story of travel booking and the transformation that she's experienced, as well as Martina introduced us to Gloria. And the panel really noted that peer-to-peer accommodation has demonstrated tremendous growth rates, but has raised lots of issues. That's going to happen when you reach an inventory of about 8 million beds. The benefits are many, yet today's discussion highlights there are risks to be addressed. This leads to a continuing and emerging research agenda of questions that need to be answered to better inform policy and also be applied in business operations. And Anita and this wonderful panel have just challenged us to take what we have learned and consider the special case or the ongoing case of inclusion. Yes, to focus on inclusion of women and youth in terms of jobs and entrepreneurship, but also about inclusion that goes beyond basic cell phone apps and using technologies to use even greater inclusion through a commitment to greater digital access, digital training, and widespread literacy. We are challenged to raise digital literacy to not only expand the capacity of current users, but also include those not even in the current system, as you heard here. As Marianne said, it's not just about using it. It starts with access and Henrietta's 6 C's. So there are many questions as we move forward. Is there a great democratization of travel emerging as travelers have great power through UGC and expansion of travel platforms? How best can businesses, governments, and the development community really learn from platform data to support countries and destinations in their efforts to grow economically productive, sustainable, and culturally sensitive tourism? Who, in the end, is truly included? Consumers, operators, destination managers, experience providers, and what about the poor? really, what about the poor as we think about this sector and its opportunities to contribute to the twin goals and moving forward in those areas? And finally, what is the impact of digital platforms in how we define and measure competitiveness? This is something that, just as we have more information, will also drive us in our thinking and its application. So yes, now our challenge is to look to the future. We have opportunities, we have challenges, there are risks that we will face, there will be trade-offs. However, here at the World Bank Group, we're committed to building knowledge to share with our stakeholders, large and small, across the tourism sector globally, and to leverage insights into actionable strategies for alleviating poverty and sharing prosperity. We look forward to working with all of you and embracing the opportunities, the new ways of doing business, and in expanding development effectiveness. There's much to do. We have new tools. We must continue to learn and continue the dialogue as we've had today. Thank you, and let me now please welcome Mr. Naji Benahassine, the Director of Finance, Competitiveness and Innovation here at the World Bank for the closing of this event and getting you on to that thirst quenching.
Thank you very much, Hannah. I'll be very quick. It's just closing remarks. First, I want to thank all of you to have joined us today for this important event. The research report that were launched, and if you didn't get a copy yet, there's many left outside, I think, are just the beginning. I used to say that tourism is a bit like education. We all feel we know about it because we've all gone on vacation, or hopefully, and education, we've all gone to school. So everyone has to say something about these two topics. And reading these two reports, and I've gone through them in some significant parts, I learned a lot. I think the new data that's being offered by the partners, the platforms, and our partners offers immense opportunities to understand much better the trends, what's happening on the demand, the supply, the quality of that's offered. So for us, as a World Bank Group, it opens whole new opportunities to improve the kind of advice we give to the developing countries, our clients, to improve their offering in this immensely important sector for growth, for employment, for poverty reduction, and reducing inequalities as well, particularly gender inequalities. So immensely important topic. I hope you found the presentation and the panels interesting, provoking. For us, it's just the start. As Director of the Finance, Competitiveness and Innovation Practice, I can tell you that the link between technology and policy work is at the forefront of our priorities. It's a priority of the President of the World Bank to understand better how these technologies can be leveraged to improve our mission to end poverty and reduce inequalities and increase shared prosperity in developing countries. And technology is already having a huge role in that. And for us, in advising governments, we want to understand how we can better leverage this, and how technology and the platforms and the user-generated content platforms in tourism is a good example where we can improve our advice, but we can also advise governments on how to prepare to reap the benefits of these technologies and maybe face some of the risks that they may present in terms of how they could regulate some of these when it's necessary to regulate. So for us, as practitioners of development, and specifically working in the tourism policy space, we need to operationalize the insights that we got today in the discussion, the findings that are outlined in these reports, so that we can start bridging this digital divide by building capacity, utilizing this data and big data in particular for action and impact. And we're going to continue to partner with the private sector. I'd like to thank them for the collaboration, and we have a very fruitful collaboration, and we signed an MOU, in fact, this morning with TripAdvisor, so we're looking forward to even strengthen collaboration on this. So we'll continue to work with client governments, the private sector, and other partners to achieve this. So on behalf of the World Bank Group Finance, Competitiveness and Innovation Practice, I'd like to thank all of you for attending this. For this great day. I'd like to thank in particular, I'm sure I'm going to miss some people, I apologize for this, but thank the team who was behind this event, our partners first, but also thank particularly Hannah Messerly for her work, Louise, the Twinning Award, and we're here, John Perrotet, and all the team under the leadership of Ernesto Cordova. So thank you very much, and I invite you to join us upstairs at the auditorium for some refreshments. Thank you again.